Afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And today, in keeping with the theme of biodiversity and different ecosystems and natural history, I wanted to touch base on something that that I probably is one of my favorite topics is aquatic biodiversity, but also aquatic ecosystems. So today I'll be looking at Trinidad and Tobago's aquatic realms, and particularly what lies beneath these aquatic realms. So to put some things in context, Trinidad and Tobago has been defined as a small island developing state within the Caribbean, like all other islands within the Caribbean. At a recent conference I attended in Barbados, I learned a new term called Big Ocean Islands, and it's a term being used to describe several of the oceanic states, because a lot of these oceanic states have more water than land. Trinidad, for instance, has a land to sea ratio of 1 to 15. So it's not surprising that we have quite a wide diversity in aquatic ecosystems. If you look at the aquatic drainages, the freshwater drainages for Trinidad and Tobago, it's quite a dense network where we have at least 4 major freshwater swamps, or one slightly brackish. In Tobago, it's quite a dense network. We also have 3 artificial reservoirs that is managed by the Water and Sewerage Authority in Trinidad, and 1 in Tobago. So we must appreciate that Trinidad has a lot of water. Trinidad and Tobago has a lot of water, and with a lot of water comes a lot of different ecosystems. Now, Kenny put forward this thinking, dividing Trinidad into different zones according to its aquatic fauna, particularly its fish. In the North region, he defined it as Antillean, and in the South region as a colonizing zone, and in the middle of Trinidad, he called it a stable relic, and more central Trinidad, an unstable relic, meaning this area was fairly dynamic in changes in the fish assemblages. And Philip followed up by dividing Trinidad into 4 very basic zones for drainages: the north, west, east, and south drainages. Now, the north and south drainages are fairly independent of each other, whereas the south drainage has the North Oropouche, it has the south, the Ottawa drainage on the side. We have the Carney drainage, and then we have the south Oropouche and the west drainage here, making up the bulk of Trinidad's freshwater drainage systems. In fact, the south Oropouche drainage is roughly 1/3 of all Trinidad drainage, and the largest drainage being the Carney drainage. So for today's talk, I'll be looking at the different zones in Trinidad and the various types of aquatic habitats within these zones, coupled with the associated fauna. For instance, along the south part of Trinidad, if you can see my cursor, this part here was referred to as the colonizing zone. And historically, this was the area where you usually find new species of fish. We documented Triporteus elongatus, the elongate hatchet fish, only on the south coast of Trinidad. This map is unpublished thus far. But at the same time, we have several coastal colonizing zones, as seen by the distribution of Dormitata maculatus, one of the fat sleeper gobies. So we must appreciate that Trinidad's coastal regions house a lot of diadromous species that have a dependency on fresh and marine habitats. You can move back and forth, but also a lot of catadromous species that have that interaction with the marine habitats to have eggs, to lay eggs, but then the juveniles migrate back upstream. Okay. So along this colonizing zone, we have a lot of estuarine habitats, as well as you're guessing, along coastal habitat. Now, it's not just the fish we have to pay attention to. Ali et al. Documented in 2016 Cuvier's dwarf caiman in the Chatham area down here, right? Which is at the southwestern tip of our peninsula. The individuals were documented, and Cuvier's dwarf caiman is characterized by these, well, apart from it being one of the smaller crocodilians, characterized by these dots along the jaw. So more work has to be done in looking at the current distribution of this crocodilian. But it is not surprising it would be found in colonizing zone. In 2017, an entire floating island was documented by the press off of the Cedrus Icacus area. It was, I think it was a few days after or before the Cedrus BioBlitz that year, I believe. So it is not surprising that you're going to get a lot of terrestrial, semi-terrestrial, semi-aquatic, aquatic organisms coming in to this colonizing zone, and not just your fish, but you could also suspect you'll get several insects, you'll get amphibians, you'll get other reptiles as well. We actually documented in the south coastline, and this was actually in the water, juvenile piranhas mixed in with a shoal of other fish. Okay, so once the salinity drops coming out of the southern part of Trinidad and southern coastline, coming up with that Orinoco plume along the Columbus Channel, you will get a drastic decrease in salinity, and with that, a lot of freshwater fauna has been coming with it. But now we want to go to the stable relics. Now the stable relics are characterized by two types of habitat. So in central Trinidad, you have a lot of drainages with high turbidity, muddy water, brown water systems. Whereas another aspect of your stable relics will be the southern slopes of the northern range, where you have clear water systems of the Caroni, such as the Guanapo, the Aripo, the Lopino rivers, all of these clear water rivers flowing into the main Caroni system. Now, so two different types of habitat within this overall zone were characterized by different types of substrate as well. In the southern slopes of the northern range, we have a lot of cobble, we have a lot of limestone features, whereas in the lower plains, you have high sediment regions. Now, in the areas that you get the cobble and in some of these drainages with high elevation, one major adaptation that we see in the fish is these fish, like our Jumbitata ancestors here, attaching to a rocky substrate. These are algal feeders attaching to a rocky substrate to algal graze. But several work has been done in the relationship of predators and prey in the southern slope of the Caroni drainage and the relationship of turbidity in this dynamic system. All right. I want you all to pay attention in particular to this guy here, the Zanji, Simrangus marmoratus, because we mentioned him in a few slides again. Now, in the Antillean zone, and as we recall from our map, is the north region. The Antillean zone is characteristics of the northern slope of the northern range. These are usually smaller catchments and short clear water catchments. But here again, you get several diadromous species such as various gobies and categorized gobies and eels. Now, categorized fish are one type of diadromous fish where the adults, they go out to sea, they lay their eggs, and the juveniles, the fry, they come back to the river systems to complete their adult life until they go back out to sea to complete the life cycle again. And I want you all to pay attention as well to this guy, Anguilla rostrata. Now, this is Shark River, one of the rivers in the northern range that flows off the northern slope. That is again characterized by a lot of cobble, rocky substrate, which is another major characteristics of Antillean zones and Antillean riverine system. So previously, Kenny documented Anguilla rostrata, or eel, American eel, even in the cariny drainage in the upper regions of the cariny drainage. And this was because back then, the water quality in the cariny drainage was actually enough to facilitate movement of these animals up and down the river system. Historically, the cariny drainage also had a higher diversity of crustaceans as well. These animals, they move between the brackish habitat and freshwater habitat to complete their life cycle. But now in recent times, as work that has been done by several of the MSc research students, we see that there's been a drastic change in the assemblage of crustaceans and freshwater fish from historical times. So as I mentioned, the crustaceans, we see that there's a big difference in the, I've seen some people in the waiting room. Okay, yeah, as we see, there's also differences in the crustacean assemblages between the northern slope of the northern range and the southern slope of the northern range. One of my recent students, Shillian Ramphal and Samantha Ramrine, they compared the diversity of crustaceans and freshwater fish between the northern slope and the southern slope of the cariny. And what they saw was that the cariny actually had a similarity of only 6% of crustaceans found similar to the assemblages found in the northern range. In fact, the only species that was common between the northern slope and the southern slope was this guy here, our manicou crab. Now, the manicou crab is found in high elevations, and it is one of two crab species that we consider to be freshwaterized. And a freshwaterized species is a species that no longer has a dependency on a marine habitat to complete its life cycle. And Trinidad, we're fortunate to have two species there, the other one being our lagoon crab. But the lagoon crab, in comparison to the manicou crab, was found only on the southern slopes of the cariny drainage, and it's also found in the Cariny Basin as well, and other parts of Trinidad. Our large crustaceans, like our Macrobacterium cassinus or river lobsters, they prefer the Antillean type habitat, lot of cobble, fast flowing, well aerated water systems. The unfortunate thing is when they compared the amount of these individuals documented by Rustant back in the 2000s, there was a drastic decrease in the number of individuals of these being documented, a huge decrease in the biomass of these individuals, which means we overhunting them. Now, as we're speaking about Antillean, Tobago also has an Antillean type habitat ecosystem. But unlike Trinidad, Tobago's riverine system is what we consider a radial dendritic pattern. If you follow these networks of all these rivers, you realize they actually stem from one area and they just branch out, like the spokes of a bicycle wheel. And they all stem from one major dividing line here, and that dividing line is our main ridge. Now, with this, Tobago being a lot smaller than Trinidad, we have all these river systems stemming from a main region that runs along the central diagonal of the island. It means all of these river systems have fairly short catchments. And because, again, Tobago is limestone in its geology because of the coral, as well as the upliftment of the substrate. Tobago is one of the last parts of the connectors of the northern range, which is a connector of the Andean range from South America. Tobago has a high limestone, a very substrate that is high in carbonates, which means this is reflected in the water systems. You have very hard water systems, very alkaline water systems, but your water systems are also clear water. So you don't get muddy water systems in Tobago. And this is characteristic of several of the other Antillean islands, Grenada, Barbados, in the Caribbean, hence the name Antillean. But Tobago, because we separated by one main ridge, we have two sides of a sword, two sides of the coin. And the two sides of the coin reflected in the fish assemblage. I made mention earlier about Anguilla rostrata, our American eel, and Sembrancus marmoratus, our common zanthi. The picture on the left shows these example of these clearwater systems. If you look at the map, along the Atlantic coastline, this is where historically we have found Sembrancus, but we have never found Sembrancus on the Caribbean side of the island. Additionally, we found Anguilla rostrata more in the northern part of the island. Philip in 98 documented it at one site in the south part of the island, but thus far, most of the sightings have been in northeastern part of the island. Now, Anguilla rostrata is a very interesting species. This eel, it will go out into the Atlantic, lay eggs, and then go back to the different regions, but not just in Trinidad and Tobago, but all along the Caribbean and along the Atlantic side of North America, etc. I had a collaborator that was trying to do a genetic map of all the Anguilla rostrata along these different coastlines to see what's the genetic composition of these different collections of Anguilla rostrata, to see if a particular island or a particular region of a country would lose a population of Anguilla rostrata. How would that affect the overall population? So that's research that we still have coming out. But it means that we need to protect these habitats that we have on Anguilla rostrata, because as I said before, in Trinidad, we have even less sightings of Anguilla rostrata. And currently, we have one MSc student, Nivon, who's looking at that comparison of the fish and crustacean diversity in Northeast Tobago, Caribbean side versus Atlantic side. So that is results that we have pending that will be out soon. All right. Now, it's not only reflected in just two species of elongate fish, the eel and Sembrancus. We see it in the posilids as well. Both Microposilia picta, our swamp guppy, has a similar distribution to Posilia reticulata, the common guppy, millions fish, 7 colors, we know it. Both of them have a very similar distribution. Microposilia prefers the coastline because that can tolerate brackish conditions, whereas Posilia reticulata can venture out a bit more inland. But again, the main ridge is the big dividing line. And this is purely coincidental, I think. But if you look at the distribution of caimans in Tobago, where they've been historically found, it has a very similar distribution. So it means that Tobago probably has a colonizing zone along the Atlantic Sea front. And this is, again, because this is the region that is more directly impacted by things like the Orinoco plume coming out of South America, right? And a recent paper we had genetic samples from Tobago and Trinidad, as well as other parts of South America. And what we saw was the caimans in Tobago was more closely related to the caimans in South America than to Trinidad. All right, so it means the colonizing zone for caimans in Tobago might actually be from South America, not Trinidad. Now, keeping along the lines of what's going on in Northeast Tobago, in 2019, Northeast Tobago was designated a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, and we call it the Northeast Tobago Man and Biosphere Reserve, NETBAMBA. Now, this region was designated because of high biodiversity, high diversity in different types of habitat, cultural uniqueness, etc. But the area also houses one of the oldest forest reserves. And this forest reserve also feeds directly into several of these drainages, like the Bloody Bear River, that houses the species like Anguilla rostrata. And it feeds directly into different marine habitats. So the main ridge and the marine habitats actually have a strong link. We use this term called ridge to reef management, where we look at the impacts, we look at the effects of what happens on our ridges and how it affects our reef system. And the connecting line through these would be our aquatic media, our riverine networks. Similar to the main ridge being one of our old sites in Northeast Tobago, we also have the ancient brain coral, which is in Speyside. In this talk, I won't go too much into the different types of diversity and different marine habitats, because it will be an even longer talk if we start to talk about seagrass beds and mangrove ecosystems and coralline ecosystems. But I wanted to touch on the fact that Northeast Tobago has had quite a good documented diversity with the elasmobranchs, fan of which 2017 indicated that there was a greater number of sightings from divers of different types of elasmobranchs in comparison to the other dive sites in Tobago. Same time, if we really utilize this ridge to reef management system, we see that we could adequately utilize this blue-green resources we have in Tobago for a blue-green economy. I don't like the term blue economy or green economy anymore, because if we utilize in our ridge to reef management system, we need to stop looking at different ecosystems in silos. It's all connected, and we need to appreciate the management style needs to be connected as well. But speaking of protected areas, in Trinidad, we have some old protected areas as well. The Caroni Bird Sanctuary is one of the Ramsar protected areas. And in recent work done by Joseph in 2022, one of our previous research students, Amy Deacon, and I shared, he noted that more than 29% of all the fish captured in 3 tributaries leading into the Caroni drainages had some sort of commercial value, whether it was cascadoo or tarpon or teta. We have a picture of a teta here. They all had some type of commercial value. Hoblacinum, the cascadoo, has aquaculture important as well as recreational. Tarpon or Megalops atlanticus has valued not just as a food species, but also a recreational sport species. And Hypostomus is important in the ornamental fish trade, because this is one of the species that is captured and exported. But it also means all 3 of these species are in need of some sort of management system, a quota system, which we currently lack in our regulatory systems. I would like to touch on a different habitat, the La Brea tar pitch lake in Trinidad. Now, several times when we think about the La Brea pitch lake, we think of it as just that, a lake of pitch, or a large poorly maintained car park with big furrows. But it is probably one of our most unique freshwater systems in Trinidad. And I think it has potential to be one of Trinidad's first UNESCO man-made biospheres. But we need to do the groundwork to get the information to make the application for this. And I'll tell you all why. So, it is already a recreational tourist site. It has high heritage value for culture to the various First Peoples group. It is already listed as a natural heritage site by the National Trust of Trinidad and Tobago. It has only 3 fish species present, and these 3 fish species will be the guppies that we see swimming around here, and the Kilifish. The leaf fish is one of the rarest species in there, but unlike most other aquatic systems, the pitch lake, we have a very linear or triangular type food web where the guppies, they eat killifish babies. Killifish eat adult small guppies, and leaf fish eat both of them once they're small enough to fit in its mouth. But we don't know what is the major source of the food web that supports life in the pitch lake. And that's one of the points of research I want to get into eventually. Now, guppies and killifish, our anablepsoides, or what was previously called Rivula satii, has one of the widest distributions of any fish in Trinidad. In probably any drain you go to in Trinidad, you'll find a jumping wabine or a millions fish, a 7-color fish, right? And these would be your guppies and your killifish. And like I said before, they eat each other. And part of my current research, it actually investigates that coevolution of both species. How is it that both species could coexist in these habitats where the killifish could explore new types of habitats, especially in high elevations, but the guppies, they soon follow once the killifish have invaded a type of habitat. At the same time, the guppies, they eat killifish eggs and juveniles. So you would think that the guppies should be driving killifish to extinction, but they don't. Whereas at the same time, killifish eat adult guppies. So what is the mechanism to have both species surviving and striking this equilibrium? And that's part of the investigations I'm currently involved with. But previously, I investigated parasites and host dynamics at elevated temperature, hence my interest in the pitch lake, because the pitch lake is one of the hottest natural bodies of freshwater in Trinidad. But when we think about temperature and aquatic fauna, we don't see that immediate link. I'll give 2 examples here, the black river conch and cascadua. Now, for most people living in Central and South Trinidad, at some point in time, you probably ate curry cascadua or curry conch. But this is why I think we need to have a management system for both of these species in particular. The black river conch, they lay their eggs at the beginning of dry seasons in muddy substrate. The ponds, the slow flowing river systems, basically the habitats you'll find in our stable and unstable relic zones in Trinidad, Central Trinidad, etc. Similarly, cascadua has that same distribution, similar distribution. So the black river conch, they lay the eggs at the beginning of the dry season, and the adults, they estivate. The young will hatch at the start of the wet season, and the adults will come out of this estivation at the start of the wet season. And then they go to feed, etc. Similarly, cascadoo, they would lay eggs at the beginning of the wet season. Once you have that immediate shift from extreme dry season to extreme wet season, you have an increase in water level, a decrease in the amount of ions in the water. That's the environmental cue for cascadoo to lay eggs, build nests, lay eggs, and a young hatch within the wet season. So imagine if we no longer have a distinct dry season or a distinct wet season. What happens then to the populations of both species? Well, what happens is you have the adults laying and building nests, etc., out of their typical season. And you would think, oh, we have more eggs throughout the year. That's a good thing. Not necessarily. It means the adults, they never got time to build enough resources within themselves to have healthy offspring, to be as fecund as they have that potential to be. So the eggs have lower survivability, and the egg clutches are smaller. Couple that with things like loss of habitat due to development, pollution at different types of habitat. Cascadoo trace probably no longer has a healthy cascadoo population along the east coast of Trinidad. And then add on top of all of that, over harvesting by humans. It means both of these species, they're kind of doomed right now in Trinidad if we continue to allow things to go as it's going, because we'll no longer be seeing any of these in the wild. What we'll be seeing them is just on a shelf being imported from South America, or it might be farm bred cascador and conch. Mightn't necessarily be a bad thing, because if we do manage farming of these species efficiently, it means we could take off some of the hunting pressures from them in the wild. Okay. So as we come to a conclusion now, what we see is that I haven't touched on several types of taxa. I just touched the tip of the iceberg with herpetofauna and the different zones. There are several unique aquatic habitats I didn't touch on as well, such as mud volcanoes and other oil seeps and sulfur springs. And all of these, they have their unique flora and fauna as well. But additionally, legislation drafting and implementation of the laws we do have is needed to properly protect our flora and fauna and unique habitats. The management plans must also follow with legislation and vice versa. Management plans must also come in sync with scientific data that is collected in a proper scientific way, empirical data that will influence management plans, that will support legislation. But with any absence of management plans and legislation, the responsibility, I believe, still falls on you, the public. We all know what is right. We need to stop thinking about instant gratification. We need to do what's right because we know what's right. We need to stop thinking about instant gratification and what we need to do now just to be happy now. We need to think about the future generation. A lot of the research that I presented here can be found online on my ResearchGate profile, but none of this would be possible without the work of my MSc. Several of the MSc students from the biodiversity, sustainable development and in the Caribbean, and also from my newfound family at the Guppy project, my Kili kids. They're helping me with work on guppies and rivulas in the Northern Range right now. So again, a special thanks to them. Also thanks to TTFNC for this invitation, and also to my recent better half, Lania, for all the support thus far.